Hello and welcome back to the Thursday Night Podcast. My name is Brady, joined by David for an emergency podcast. Georgia State has 0 current head basketball coaches employed. A couple of news items dropped the last couple of days. Gene Hill is the first kind of domino to drop there. Women's basketball coach is resigning, will not be back for year 9. We will get to that news at the end, but we are going to start where I think a lot of people's attention has been drawn, and the announcement that I think everyone's been waiting for, and maybe we're starting to worry wasn't going to come. And we are here 2 days after we recorded the last podcast. This is kind of the timeline I was expecting when we started recording last week's episode, where it's like we're going to be back like on Friday recording an episode talking about this stuff, but drag out it did. But in the end, kind of the only result I think that could happen. I mean, I laid it out. It's kind of obsolete at this point, but if you want to go back and give us a listen on the last episode we recorded earlier in the week, there's basically no math that added up that made sense for anyone involved for a year 5 under Jonas Hayes to happen. And so even as things drug on, I really never wavered, just my read of the situation. It never until this morning was like, this is happening, but it was never really out of my mind that this is the way it was going to go in some way, some form or fashion. And so I think it's a sad day in some ways, because I think everyone around Georgia State wanted this to work. The most upvoted thing on the boards for the piece that I wrote announcing the firing of Hayes is a friend of the pod, Mike Holmes, saying like he was a joy to work with when I was doing the NL Collective stuff. He was always very pleasant, and that is not always the case with these type of coaches. And the second most upvoted thing was me saying it'd be cool if he had a nice Rob Lanier-esque run in a decade or decade and a half where he gets a second head coaching job and it works this time and he goes to the tournament and kind of gets another slice at it. But going 48-78 in 4 seasons, never finishing above 500, never finishing with more than 14 wins, losing the first game in 3 of the 4 Sun Belt tournaments the team went to, it didn't work. This 4 years didn't work, and nothing was going to change in year 5 going forward. It just kind of, there's a lot of things that had been happening just year after year that just felt like wasn't going to change with this program under Coach Hayes. And so the decision was made, and Georgia State's officially on a coaching search.
They are, and in a way, I do feel bad, and I think that sort of feeling makes sense, because I don't know if you remember where you were the night that it was first reported that Hayes was going to be Georgia State's next coach, but I was in Boston. Like, I was on it was like a graveyard tour thing, like tourist trapping thing. It was cool. But I remember on the second to last stop, I happened, we were just pausing for a second to let people use the bathroom and stuff like that. So I checked my phone, and that was when I first saw, I think it was Rothstein, who had basically said,
yeah, should say it was Rothstein with this news as well, who was first as well.
Yeah.
Then we all hopped along with. Yeah,
which makes sense. I'm pretty sure he did that thing where it's like, oh, I can't say that X coach is going to Y team, but you all know that when they're connecting the dots like that.
Well, it was Seth Davis with Ron Hunter and Tulane, not Rothstein, but
right.
Rothstein put out the sources say Georgia State has parted ways with Jonas Hayes, and that's what kind of kicked this off officially or officially this morning. But I could not tell you where I was. Probably somewhere in the Metro Atlanta area on my phone, way too much. So nothing's changed.
Right. It just sucks because there was so much excitement for it. It was the right coach at the right time, so we thought, and there was a lot of momentum, I think, going into what was that, the 2022 season? Yeah, the 2022 season. 23, yeah. And the car just never got out of neutral, and that sucks. It sucks to be here 4 years later, but that's just the unfortunate reality of the situation.
Yeah. Will be the first, whoever the new coach is, will be the first coach since Ron Hunter not to take over in the season immediately following an NCAA tournament appearance, which that's a pretty good run. Hitting 2 coaches in a row like that, going since 2011, that A, you had to fire a coach, and B, the other times you've lost coaches because You've literally done the best achievement you can do as a mid-major and make the NCAA tournament. So can't lose sight of that, but it also speaks to where the expectations are with this program, and those were just clearly not being met. And the leeway kind of went away after year 2, I would say, because year 1, roster's in a bit of a shake-up, and it's a first-time head coach. You're giving him a bit of grace to find it. But I will say, in all of this, I don't know that this changes anything. The biggest what if I am struck by in the Jonas Hayes era as we kind of look back at it. Obviously, DeJuan Odom follows him year 1, is there in the program for a couple of years. Cesar Edwards was with him at Xavier, goes to Missouri State at first. The only question I have is if both of them come in year 1, is the picture any different? Are they better right away? Because if you go back and look at that, I mean, DeJuan Odom, I think a reliable point guard. Maybe when he was leveling down, it wasn't like the all-conference, like, unguardable guy maybe people hoping for, but good player. Certainly put up good numbers that year. Cesar, when he came in year 3 under Jonas Hayes, was the best player on the team and kind of sparked them in the middle of the year. Team also had Colin Moore, who didn't play the whole season. He was hurt, but ended up leading the team in scoring. Goes to Grand Canyon and is part of an NCAA tournament team there. Also had Jaheim Hudson, who ends up at Auburn, followed Rob Lanier a year late to SMU and then lands his final year at Auburn. Like, that is a good core for a Sun Belt team. And so, obviously, you had 3 of those guys and you only won 10 games. So, the problems with what was not working with Jonas Hayes were even starting that year, but just the only real what if I can point to. Because after that, there were 3 different opportunities to remake the roster. This year, we're able to keep your 2 best players that you could have kept heading into year 4, and the results got worse. And so, I say that to paint a what if, kind of draw a painting for the viewers of, like, maybe where things could have turned, and maybe you grab some momentum or keep it going from the Rob Lanier tournament year. And instead, the team only wins 10 games. Feels like you're really chasing it from that point on. And obviously, as we were sitting here talking, they never found it under Jonas Hayes.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the reality of the situation. Like, I wish there was more to it, We talked on Wednesday this past week about how just at no point has Georgia State taken any sort of step, and and honestly, in either direction. Like, I think if they had truly bottomed out, like put up a year like ULM did last year,
approaching it this 3rd point. So obviously, saved that nosedive just a smidge, but
sure. But if they had done last year what ULM did this year, there's no way that Coach Hayes would have been back for a 4th season. So yes, it has obviously fallen significantly since where it was, but there was always some hope that it was just like a couple of more pieces, a couple extra dollars in NIL, another year to get the staff to, like, really work things through and, figure things out. And it just never materialized.
Yeah, I've got a few things as we kind of wrap up the Jonas Hayes era. I mean, we could drag this out over a couple of pods, but honestly, I think we'll have brighter days to look forward to. So just kind of diagnosing it all at once. I was even going to maybe just write a piece about this, and it's like, you know what, I've got a podcast, so I'm just going to say all these words instead of typing it all out. Just work smarter, not harder. But there's a few things that come to mind looking at this era, just like why specifically it didn't work. The first one, and this is just kind of vague, is just kind of they didn't gel quickly at any point during the tenure. And the way that specifically manifested itself was that the only year they finished above 500 and out of conference is the first year. And that was a year in which they had 3 non-Division I games count for their record. If you take those out, it would have been sub 500 that season as well. And so I get it in this day and age where in all of those cases, it was basically a brand new roster. But other coaches across the country are doing the same thing and not taking until the middle of January to get it into high gear. And so it still is ultimately a skill that coaches in 2026 with the portal, everything, how you have to be. And it just is a gear that Jonas Hayes never showed. It was just always a slow learning process of getting the guys to fit together, kind of tinker with rotations and find the right mix. And it never really came to fruition. And this year was the most obvious example because you start out 1-9 with some really, really blowout bad losses in the month of November and December.
And, it was nice that they did kind of fight to get their footing from there. And obviously, it's better to have that kind of mid-season. Swoon is not the word. What's the opposite of a swoon? Total brain crash out. Apologies.
The swoon is the rest of this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Winning streak.
It was nice that they had that stretch.
They won 4 games.
They started to win some games. Between that Jacksonville State game and then the Arkansas State game at the end of that 4-game win streak. Like, that was their season right there, and the vibes were great. And the sad part is. There's no way to say this kindly, but it never really felt like it was coaching. Like, it just felt like, okay, all right, you've got one player, Jelani Hamilton, kind of going supernova. Okay, you've got, the defense has kind of turned it up a little bit. A lot of it. They played some good defense during that stretch. It's like they got beat by Georgia Southern pretty badly, played that Columbia D1 game, and that was okay, we need to put the ball in the hoop. That's our confidence. And then after that Arkansas State game, it was like, okay, all of this is for naught. Like, this is never coming back, and that to me just like really showcases that, okay, like that stretch wasn't on the coaching, like flipping a switch halfway through the season or, a quarter of the way through the season. It was just the players got a little better, their legs were underneath them, and and I think there's something to be said about you said this a lot last year specifically, how Georgia State would always start really slow in games, be down, they'd cut like the halftime deficit down to like 8 or something, and then they would mount like a very spirited comeback, and then they would lose. Like, this year that happened a couple of times, but not as nearly as much in my opinion as last year.
The JMU game, they come back from 15 down, but kind of ran out of gas there.
Yeah, that specific game happened 20 times in the 2024-2025 season. And like that really feels like that those are how the Coach Hayes seasons go. Because how many times did we look up in December and it's like, okay, not a great team, I guess, and then they find a way to, cobble together some wins in January, February, and then come up just short. They won 1 tournament game in his 4 years, and that's the way that they structured the tournament. Georgia State was playing teams on their level. It's not like they were just like getting, okay, we just got matched up against the top of the top because this is a normal looking bracket, and oh no, the 1 seed Troy dominated in their first round game. Like, no, that's not what it was. It was just, all right, Georgia State was playing a team that they're, a little bit worse. I would
have to check.
A little bit better.
I have to imagine the best seeded team that they ever lost to in the tournament was the one when they won a game.
Yeah.
When they lost to Marshall last year. That probably was the best quote-unquote team they played. And so they're losing to a lot of, double-digit seeds. And one of the times they lost to Texas State went on a run. And it's like, that could have been you. Like, you get to the next round, you see what happens. And this is where it's, like, there is a lot of luck involved in the tournament. And it's really hard to evaluate coaches fairly when you're saying, like, well, this mid-major coach has only made the tournament twice. And it's like, yeah, but factor in how many times you have to have the right at the right time, win games, and have every bounce go your way. But I still think there is a certain skill to the coaching side of getting teams ready for the tournament and managing those games and managing turnarounds, managing you've got half a week to scout a team, you just learned who it is, and clearly that it just wasn't there. The other thing is, one of the other things, just play on the road, and I guess that kind of goes into the neutral side stuff. Just never a good road team. Obviously, the first year, the baddest omen of that, they did not win a single game on the road. They were 0-11 away from Convocation Center. Overall, it was 11-45 in road games. And then you tack on the neutral sites, it's not much better.
I genuinely want to know what happened. Like, not even in a, I want to make fun of things, or like, they were so bad that it must have been a conscious effort. Like, they didn't practice, they were getting in late, they were, no curfew. Like, there has to be a reason.
I would hope that, like, those type of things got shifted year to year. It's like this, we went 0 for last year. Let's change something up on how we do road trips. And, I don't know that that's the case, but I think at the end of the day, that is a thing that is controlled by coaches and how they manage the players in those moments. And like if they give up an 8-0 run on the road and the crowd gets kind of rabid, like what are they saying to get them in the right zone? What are they drawing up to just kind of get a bucket to stop a run? And that was a constant thing, kind of dragging into some other stuff with, just there was never any year where it was like they were very good offensively or very good defensively or just above average in anything. So it just felt like there was never a moment that they had like if they're on the down 10 on the road, give a big run. It always felt like when they would combat it, it would just like be a run of shots going in rather than like a change up of the strategy, good play design, like on a run, good sets that just kind of got it going. And like that's what you need. The college head basketball coach has the greatest power of any college football, college baseball, any sport. Same with the NBA as well, to a greater degree, because I mean they're literally calling the plays. NBA head coaches most of the time. That is like the biggest responsibility for any head coach is like in any sport is that they have to be the one running that stuff. And so just clearly that was missing. And that was the thing I was going to say earlier to your point is like even meaner maybe than what you said is like the times when they went on runs in the middle of the year, it really just felt like it was a team that just like they were making more shots on that given night. It wasn't like the style was that different. It wasn't like how they were doing it was that different. It was just like some of these shots that hadn't been falling last week fell, and so they got a win. And so it was really hard. Like even this year when they win 4 straight, it didn't feel all that different. And I don't know that I'm old tasting myself. Like maybe I sounded totally different on the pod. I don't go listen back, so no one cite that on me. But I don't think we were that amped about it or thinking it was that much of a... Like, we recognized like this was a great start and it was worth heralding, especially with how bad it had been and that the players hadn't given up. But I don't think either of us really expected it was going to be that they're going to rattle off 12 in a row because they just haven't ever been that team because you can't shooting percentage ticking up your way to 12 straight wins. That has to come from a real, genuine turnaround backed by the schematics, the play calling, the mentality set by the head coach, and that just was never what this program was under Jonas Hayes.
I mean, hell, like you're couching this, but like I'm looking at the schedule and I remember our thoughts. It was okay after the Arkansas State game, go beat Louisiana because they're horrible.
That is it.
LOL.
And they lost to them twice in the end.
Exactly. And then it was like, okay, South Alabama's like relatively good. I think they were like tied for second or third in the league at the time. I know they finished second, but
I mean they were win the Sun Belt I think into the last week. So they dropped very late because of the tiebreakers. So
correct. But it was mostly just like, okay, outside of Troy, every single home game that you have remaining is a winnable game for you, even if you are a team that is going to struggle through this. Yes, the James Madison and Old Dominion road games, not necessarily fun, but you had 6 home games, 1 versus the presumptive Sun Belt leader at the time, 1 against your rival who blew you out, kind of because of their style of play. Every other game at home was a winnable game, and they lost all of them except for the Georgia Southern game. So it's not even like we thought, okay, yeah, all right, they've won 4 straight, they won, 8 in a stretch of like 12 games, 11 games or whatever. That's who they're going to be the rest of the season. No, it was just like, okay, and that to me is one of the defining things of this era, because it's not like I know fans hate this, but truthfully, if you beat bad teams and you are like okay against good teams, that's fine. That is a totally fine way for you to operate whatever sport that you're playing.
You can probably get above 500 in the Sun Belt doing that.
Exactly.
Provided you don't go 1-9 in non-con.
Correct.
Like
Georgia State under Coach Hayes didn't beat good teams ever, basically. They sure didn't beat bad teams usually. So it was just they were just kind of mucking their way into whatever win total they ended up getting. And like that is the defining factor here. Like there's so many games where you and I sat here on this podcast and we're like, okay, like, this team is coming into Atlanta. They're not necessarily great. They can't shoot great. They can't do this great. They give up too many points. And then they come in and play Georgia State and it looks like the 2015 Warriors, or something. And it's like, what are we doing? How is this happening, not only now, but consistently over this period of time?
Yeah, and I think part of it is, we talked about this a bit with Georgia Southern being able to mount a run to the Sun Belt title game, like that they don't play great defense this year, but they are pretty good, like above average offensively, and that's what they kind of used to get to the title game in the Sun Belt. They shot the three great, and it's something that game to game you kind of win in knowing like this is what they do, this is how they're going to challenge you, and if you're not going to just be like a great team in a well-rounded facet, you've got to have something. Like we always talk about with App State under Dustin Kearns, like the offense is very spotty, and there's some games where it's like there's their downfall because they don't break 50 and they lose a game by like 20 because it's like the defense was still great, but the offense was at such a level. But you know you're going to get tested by their pack line defense stuff. Georgia State per Ken Palm's efficiency ratings, the best marker they ever got in any statistic was they were 182nd in D1 in offensive efficiency last season, so the Cesar Edwards season. They did not get any higher than 182 in any either offensive or defensive stat, and that's of 8 times, eight stats being measured. Whereas if you looked at some of the teams, even if they finished below them a year here or there, other teams like a Georgia Southern, who has leaned on their offense under Charlie Henry, finish in in the higher hundreds in offense, maybe into the top 100. And okay, maybe they aren't a 25-win team. Maybe there's flaws that are going to catch them, and it's why they're cutting down the nets. But that's what gives them a chance against some of these better teams and gives them a chance in tournament settings. And there were just nothing that this team, in 4 years of trying and putting different rosters together, that ever was able to maximize the thing that they did. This year they were an elite free throw shooting team out of nowhere, but like even then there were games where it wasn't like they were able to maximize that to the full advantage, and you're not going to win 20 games like with that being the one thing you do well. You've got to have something in the flow of the offense or the defense that is going to provide you with success. And the biggest number that jumps out, I mean, I feel like we're kind of almost done emptying the clip here. A lot of negative after, I want to reiterate that like we don't like doing this, and it is unfortunate that this is how the tenure of Jonas Hayes had to go, but 2-point offensive field goal percentage, 46.5% year one. It's 314th that year in Division One. 48.6 ticks up, but that's still only 257. Ticks up again, 49.8% year three. Again, the best numbers they had. Cesar Edwards makes sense, but still not 50% on twos. And that's only 227th, so still not into the top half of Division One. And then it bottomed out this year. They made 42.9% of 2-point shots. 364th, so I believe that's second to last in the division, where you're making almost 43% of shots that, the average in the sport is about 50. Probably a tick above. Like, I don't know why, and part of it just like goes back to what they were drawing up or not drawing up to put players in success to make it around the basket, but it didn't look all that often like a talented team around the hoop. And very often you had guys, even guys that they like Nick McMullen was like 57%, I want to say, something like that at UNC Asheville. He was still above 50 without checking the numbers last year, but there was a dip. And like Cesar Edwards, I think was the same way from his numbers in Missouri State, even as he had a good year here. I think Jelana Hamilton might have been in the 30s in 2-point percentage, and he took a fair amount of them. And it's like, I don't think it's strictly a talent thing where like these players were just this bad, but other teams are just better around the hoop than Georgia State. And this year it was literally all but one team in the sport was better around the hoop than Georgia State was. And a lot of them in dramatically greater fashion. So it's like almost the most fundamental thing, like the easy shots, literally the layups. This team just was never good at, and this year was disastrous at. And that was just kind of the biggest through line of the 4 years is that number. Like on Ken Palm, good stats are green, red stats are in red. That was the eye-popping red. And it was basically just across the board every season.
Yeah, every baseball fan looks at Baseball Savant. It's like, oh, red, like, that's great. Georgia State fan looks at Ken Palm. Oh, no, that's not great.
So, I mean, I'm kind of out as far as, we've kind of covered it. 25 minutes sums up about the
I really don't want to talk about like candidates or anything now because I don't think like there will be time for that.
Fair enough. I wrote down 10 names. I wasn't going to say all of them. But.
Please, like when I say that there will be time for that, I mean, to me anyway, today is about Georgia State did the right thing. They made a move that is good. I mean, we'll be back on these airwaves in 5 days or something, and we can have an entire. It's you and I. We can have an entire hour-long podcast specifically just on the candidates. Obviously we're not going to do that, but I think it just goes to show that this is something that we've been mulling for a while. And even it kind of is funny to both look back at the mid-season we gotta stop talking about this, and then the end of season, all right, we should tap dance around it because we know it's happening, but come on, we know that this is gonna happen here. So
yeah, well, I guess if we want to take a group vote and it's 50-50, we can I guess leave some of it. I do want to say this off the top, whether we talk about coaching candidates now, whether we should save it for next week, whether you see someone else talking about it on Twitter, I put this out there on Twitter. I just want to reiterate now on podcast form. Georgia State is not going to be leaking a lot of stuff. So if you're seeing a name come up a good bit, it is not going to be coming from Georgia State. That is just not how Charlie Cobb handles this situation. So if you see a name, I don't want to say it's that guy wouldn't get hired, but it is probably the case where it's someone angling for the job and wanting their name out there, and their agent's doing what they're supposed to do, getting a guy looks at jobs. But I would just caution people if you see someone coming up a lot, or if you see just something that seems like, oh, we have news here. We're literally going to find out in the same way we found out today with someone, maybe even literally John Rothstein, saying sources say Georgia State's hiring this person as the head coach. And so I just want to kind of hit that kind of disclaimer. Those of you who this is not your first rodeo will get that, because that's how Jonas happened. That's how Rob Lanier happened. It's how Del McGee happened. There are going to be names that are floated. It's not going to be the hottest job on the market. So there's going to be other names out there that that's going to be where the gravity is going towards. But I imagine we'll see some people saying here's the names to look out for. I just want to grain of salt it, just because it is possible that none of that is really where the direction of the search is going, and we'll all just kind of find out together in a larger sense. I mean, that is just the way that Charlie Cobb has managed these things, and I see no reason to think that this search is going to go any differently. I will say this, though. There's some good candidates out there as far as high major assistants. I really think you're going to want to hire a coach who has got a history as a head coach and who has won as a head coach before. And so I've got both in mind, and I'm not going to thumb my nose at they're good high major assistants who are ready for the first job. It just feels like a real situation where after doing that and it didn't work out, you're really going to want to go in a different direction and look at someone who is not quote unquote learning on the job.
Yeah, this really does feel like football teams do this all the time, where they hire the hot coordinator who has never been a coach before. They make good moves. They get one of their two, whichever their opposite side of the ball is. They get a former head coach to coach that side of the ball. It doesn't work out for whatever reason. And then the next hire is always okay, we need a guy who has been a head coach.
You marry
before.
The opposite of your ex.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's
and
just what it is.
I guess I want to re-clarify what I just said literally a minute ago on this podcast. I think this is going to be a sought-after job. I looked at today, Jeff Goodman just kind of reset the page on, I think there's 30 openings right now. And, there's your Syracuse's, your Providence, other ones that I'm blanking on because I'm not looking at right now, but that are clearly a tier or 3 or 5 ahead of where Georgia State is. But as far as the strictly one bid major leagues of right now who is available, there's not that many jobs I would take over this Georgia State one. And I think there's a tendency among fan bases when things are going badly to accentuate the negative, totally human nature. And I think there is a sense of even when it's they should make a move and move on from Jonas, kind of who wants this job? Look at the momentum's gone. This is in the same program. And I would just say that without really looking into it that much, I kind of think the general reaction to the last 4 years has been like what the hell is happening? Why is the Georgia State team,
we still
15 games under?
We still get broadcasters, Georgia State broadcasters and, away team, Sunbelt team broadcasters. I have specifically heard them say that line every single year. The first year, like you said earlier, it was, okay, they're, new coach, like they're building fine. And even as late as like the tournament last year, they were like, okay, Georgia State fans should be excited going into the 2025 season because, it seems like they're going to finally put it together, but otherwise, what the hell has happened at that school? So I agree with you. I think it might not be the most sought after opening just in general. And it's especially like it was a very sought after opening going into the hiring of Coach Hayes. But yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody who is a serious candidate is going to look at the last 4 years and be like, oh, that's not a job I'd want. They're just going to say, oh, that's the bar that I have to go clear? Yeah, sign me up. I know I'm a good coach.
Right. I mean, you have the ego part where everyone believes that they are going to be the one. I mean, Jonas came in believing he was going to be the one to have a winning product on the court. Like, it doesn't always work out, but there's that self-belief that you have to have, almost like too far, like the hubris as a head coach, because you are taking on a huge shoulder of responsibility when you're taking these type of jobs, but you believe you're ready for it, whether it's you've done it before, it's your first gig. And so I honestly don't know how much worse of a job it is perception-wise than it was when Jonas took the job. Like, I think the last 4 years haven't gone well, but I just don't think that it's really changed as far as you've still got the pros that you've got. Slightly less new, but still pretty new, nice arena. One of the better ones in the Sun Belt.
So I hear
it's in Atlanta.
So hear
there's
you,
quality of life stuff.
And I think that those are obviously pros. But the only reason I'm going to say that I do think there is a material difference is because, one, coming off of an NCAA appearance, and that was the third year of that coach, who was replacing a guy who went to the tournament three times?
Yeah, 3 times.
3 times, yeah. So that's the first thing. And number two, we're in a different college basketball environment.
No, that's totally fair. And frankly, if the money package, like what they talk about in the interview, is not up to snuff, and if guys don't feel like the commitment is going to be there for the money they need, then they're not going to get their top candidates. And so certainly they've got to pitch Georgia State to these prospective new coaches in the best light possible to get them to say, I'm going to come here and get what I need to succeed, which I don't know is something we need to worry about, but I think is a worry collectively around the fan base of like, are we getting past? I know there's different numbers floating around. Certainly Georgia State started a couple years ago when some of these new teams came in the league near the top half in salary, and they were paying Jonas less than they paid Lanier or Ron Hunter, and so that number dropped some. Clearly, I don't think they were playing at the top of the league in NIL, which now it's rev share. I guess NIL is a shorthand, but we can just call it whatever, just the salary. You're going to have an attractive offer there to coaches who are going to want, especially if they're coming from, whether it's they were previously assistant or currently an assistant at a high major, like used to that type of lifestyle. They're not going to want to have to scrounge and not be able to rely on putting a roster together to succeed and win. And so I don't really know how to separate the results and kind of the funk this program was in specifically versus how much work they have to do to kind of build that infrastructure. But that is certainly, it's fair to say that is the question that exists that didn't maybe exist when Jonas took the job. So I'm not trying to be all sunshine and say, like, everything's great, everything's fine. I just think that it is still at least around the same level it was back then. And I think it is going to be, you point out that coming in after 4 straight losing seasons, if someone comes in and wins 20 games, fan base is going to be in raptures. It's like, this is an easy opportunity. If you're able to come in and succeed, you can come in on your white horse and kind of save the day. And it shouldn't be that hard to build because everyone's building a roster every offseason, so it's not like it's a new thing, even if you're doing it in a new arena, a new college campus and all. So that part of it is almost not worth sweating, I think. And we've seen those type of turnarounds in year one under coaches. Obviously, it wasn't the case with Jonas. The team got a lot worse in year one, but I I'm curious. I am interested to see who is interested, who ends up getting the job. Like I say, I lean a certain way, and I don't want to say it's impossible that they poach a sitting head coach, but kind of where I think the sweet spot might lie, especially because there are some good possibilities in this category, is recently let go or out of the market head coaches. I think there's a few of those that, yes, they might have just gotten fired from either a mid-major or a power conference, but I think that they fit the bill. Wes Miller got fired from Cincinnati. He's probably top of my list. He built a real winner at UNC Greenbow before he got the Cincinnati job, and it did not work out. But they had like elite level defense, and so if you've been frustrated watching Georgia State's defense the last 4 years, I think that is something that would immediately get rectified.
Hilariously, part of why I wanted to pause it is because I did see 20 minutes before the pod that he was fired today. So I was like, oh, that seems like some research. Name. Yeah, I was like, that seems like a name that I remember. Let me go figure out where I know that name from. So, but yeah, I totally agree with you. That would be a very good name for Georgia State.
But there's a couple options there as well. Kim English just got fired from Providence. Less track record there, but was in his mid-30s, got hired by a power conference in the Big East, so there's certainly something there. Mike Jones, who was at UNCG, who replaced Wes Miller, was let go. 20 win seasons there, I think, every year until this last one. Not really sure the situation there on the ground of why he was let go, but also did the same, kind of built Radford up. So it's a guy with kind of a track record of winning there. The other part of it, and this is not just like Georgia State being a cheap thing, but it would be a case where if you've just paid a buyout to Jonas Hayes, you don't really want to also pay the offset money to get someone out of their contract and wherever they are sitting as a head coach. And so I don't think it's impossible, but the type of places that usually do that, and what you see at a lot of the power conference level, it's a drop in the ocean. Casey Alexander is leaving Belmont, going to Kansas State. No problem for Kansas State to pay their buyout to Jerome Tang and also pay a big salary to Casey Alexander and also pay Belmont for him leaving his contract early. That is kind of how it's just normal operation. I wouldn't categorically say it wouldn't happen, but it's also because I think that other market is pretty hot. And I think there's some good names there that you could get someone in, quote unquote, off the street that ticks a lot of boxes. And so I'm curious what direction it goes. Obviously, Jonas Hayes was on everybody's radar. Rob Lanier was on basically nobody's. So we've had 50-50 of being in the ballpark of what way the hire was going to go, kind of tracking this thing in the recent time in Georgia State history. And so time is just going to tell. Kind of things I laid out last time about the timeline still means I think we're going to see this progress pretty quickly. And I don't know that they started today as the announcement came out. I guess it hasn't even come out officially from the school, but the work has already started, probably did before the official, the leaking, in kind of looking into the next head coach. And so maybe by the time we're recording next, though maybe a little later than that, I would expect, certainly within the next 2 weeks, that we know who it is. And we can both do our research and kind of keep going through some names, rattling through some names, even though, as I hit a little while back, speculation and names out there in the public are not necessarily the formula to track with this job. Yeah, it's fun to do. It's an itch you can't stop scratching.
I'm so glad you said that because it frustrates the crap out of me when fans do that thing where they're like, oh, I don't want to talk about rumors. I don't want to talk. This is the fun parts. This is the part where everything is level theoretically and all of the possibilities are endless. To me, this is the part of the fandom. We're the sickos who play the footy manager, the franchise modes and stuff like that. This is the time for us to rise up and actually have in-depth discussions about things. The time for the basketball will be there. It's always there. You got to talk about something in the off season, though.
We are slightly less out of our depth pocket, backseat GMing and making these hires and looking at resumes than we are backseat coaching. So it feels like safer ground, even though obviously
Correct.
There's a tremendous amount of things I'm not qualified to do on the athletic director side of things as well. So not saying I could do it, but it feels slightly easier to dream just because the old cliche about like coaches have forgotten more about the sport they coach than you've learned, all the rest of it. I'm interested. I think everyone is, it's like, I wrote this down. I just wrote down sigh of relief. Like, all about what we said about, like, no one's happy this happened, big picture, but I think in the moment, it just feels like a reset for this program that desperately needed a reset. And I think coaching searches bring back some excited feelings. And I think Georgia State men's basketball fans needed some excited feelings. Going into next season, going into this spring, summer.
This era for Georgia State sports, man, it's been a time. It's been a time.
Yeah, and this is the other news. I would say slightly snuck up on me because this comes very late on Wednesday. I think literally to the minute when we started recording the podcast, so I didn't even see it until after we wrapped. Gene Hill's let go. He goes 102 and 135 in 8 seasons at Georgia State with 3 winning seasons. Frankly, I didn't really have a strong lean either way on this. There were cases to be made that it was time to just make a change. They had slipped the last couple years. They slipped this year after it felt like they had been trending in the right direction. It didn't have to be the time, but it makes sense that it is the time. He is resigning is the official word. So he can start on finding his new job, and Georgia State can start on the search for his replacement. Again, the exact same stuff about him as with Jonas, where to a man, to a woman, everyone who's interacted with Gene say he's a very, very classy, nice guy. My interaction with him, absolutely the same vibes. One of the good people in the sport, and it is unfortunate that this is a business that is dictated by wins and losses, and so the decision ultimately, I think, makes the most sense. Different kind of, like, this hasn't been a program that has made the NCAA tournament since 2003, when they made it 3 years in a row. They're in the early mid-aughts. They're still trying to find kind of the way back to that, to those type of conversations, whereas it wasn't that long ago. This podcast has existed when Georgia State men's basketball was an NCAA tournament team, and so a little bit further out in the wilderness, but I'm curious the direction they go, and I don't think the path back is so daunting, if I can put it like that. And I've got some numbers to that effect, but I'll let you also speak on this as well.
Yeah, not only was it a surprise because it dropped as we hit record, I think it was a surprise to me because while I agree with you that you could go either way, I think I was certainly leaning more towards the he stays camp. And like when I say either way, I'm talking like 60-40 stays, like certainly closer to 50-50. Because I don't know. I just think that I could understand where the deficiencies were on the 2025-26 women's team. And a lot of it was just 1 year. Like you could legitimately convince me that, everybody comes back who you want to come back, and you make some upgrades. You find a way to, continue the Crystal Henderson era. And like, that's a top team in the Sun Belt. Get as tall as you can find, somebody who, for the love of God, can grab a rebound. Show them the Torian Prince video from 2015 or 2016 or whatever, over and over again in the offseason. But, like, I really think that the bones for a team that could make a run was there heading into next year. So I think that's why this caught me off guard, because I really think the step back this year was just, hey, some of your best players got old. And what happens in college basketball when you're not, Trinidad Chambliss or something? Like, that's, you graduate, you leave. Like, that happens, there's, at some point, that's not on the coaching, and if you want to sit there and tell me the overall record, the 8 years, like, yeah, I'll believe that. Okay. But it really did feel like things were trending in such a nice, positive direction, heading into this year, that this one was a surprise to me.
Yeah, I think the part of it I'd say is, for all we've said about like the misery of this current era, the last couple of years has just been a real downtrend outside of women's basketball doing better than expected last year. If you have a coach who in 8 years is not only under 500 but a good bit under 500. That it's not unreasonable to look at that as a positive that they're saying we are trying to get to a better standard than this. And like, it'd be easy to just say the pressure isn't there the same because there aren't the same people on Twitter, message boards, whatever, as ready for Gene to leave as they are with Jonas. If you look at the results and they're not up to stuff and you think this is a program that can get to a better level, it is a cold business sometimes, but that is ultimately what it comes down to. And I say get to another level. I don't think it's like, I don't know, year one, though turnarounds can happen quickly nowadays. I don't think it is that much work for them to get to be a top half Sun Belt program. And it feels like that isn't an unreasonable goal, especially the same advantages we speak to with the men's program, minus the very recent success, are there for the women. New arena in Atlanta, all that goes along with that. Whether they're in high school or whether they're playing somewhere now in college, players that can have the opportunity to come closer to home. It's kind of the biggest thing other than what Ron Hunter did schematically that helped generate the success. Is you had a lot of players, whether they're your Ryan Harrows coming back or Manny Atkins or DeMarcus Simons never leaving Metro Atlanta and coming here and playing out of high school. They can make a success of that as much as the men were able to do. And so that's certainly something they can lean on. And the numbers I'd put to this is that this year, Old Dominion was 6th in the league. They had an 18-14 record. They were 9-9. That could happen next year for this team, and that's not an unreasonable jump. They'd be 8-win improvement, but those happen. And so you could easily sell me on the idea that at worst this Georgia State team is 4 games above 500, and that would be measurably better than it's been. And also not saying like they could roll out of bed next season and suddenly be an absolute killer and top of the league every season. They got to get to that first step where they are winning more consistently to get to where you're hoping they're going to build on that plane to competing for Sun Belt titles, which has not really been in the conversation with this team since they joined the league in the same way that it had been with the men.
Yeah, and I mean, for as much as the men's standard has been raised, like you just said, the women's standard has not nearly been there. And I think it would be a disservice to suggest that we don't want that as well, because we absolutely do. I mean, as a former marching band person, I think what was frustrating about having to do the women's games before the men is not, women basketball bad. No, the teams were just not good. Like that, and like it became hard to watch some of those teams. And I think the kind of, I guess, bittersweet part of it is I bet you their record recently has been, even though it wasn't great, it's still been better, and they've been playing more competitive games than I think they were, a redacted amount of time ago because we're old.
We went through however many minutes that was talking about like the men struggled to have an identity and beat teams a certain way. Gene Hill's teams didn't, and Sean O'Regan, JMU's head coach, who's currently celebrating them cutting down the nets going to the tournament, probably pretty happy he doesn't have to keep playing Gene Hill's teams because there was some kind of formula he'd worked out that Georgia State had been a really tough out for JMU, who was one of the better teams in the league since they've joined. And, you can go through the years. They got to win, I think, every of the last few seasons. Or the one year they didn't was the year JMU ran the table in Sun Belt play. And they were the team playing them within single digits both times they played. And so it's like, that wasn't the issue. It wasn't like the base level, like, is this team able to be competitive? It's just like the year-to-year consistency and getting above middle of the pack, lower middle of the pack, as the case was this year. And it wasn't happening, but it wasn't the case where they were so far off it, we were just kind of going through the litany of it with the men.
Yeah, and I really do hope that whatever hire they make, they can find a way to, and if you say to somebody, oh, my college basketball team is going to improve by 8 wins, that sounds like a lot. But I really don't think it's that much for this Georgia State women's team. I really don't. Yes, the number objectively is a good bit, just based on how seasons work. It's probably a hair under 33%, but I really think that there was enough talent here to where that's not as crazy as it seems.
And this is Danger Zone mentioning Georgia Southern in a positive light on this podcast, but
don't even do it.
They were 15-18 2 years ago, 4-14 in league play. This year with a new coach, I think came in last season, maybe this is her first season, they're 23-7. They won the league, going 16-2, and they did not win the tournament. So I guess there's your turnaround for people. Matt, I brought up Georgia Southern, but significantly raised the bar into where they were the regular season champs. So in another sense, the bar to get to that level isn't crazy high either, because someone just did it from being one of the lower seeded teams in the Sun Belt 2 years ago to being the winner of the regular season this season. And kind of along that line of thinking, Hannah Hayden is the coach there. She was at Georgia Southwestern before that, and has been in the lower levels and made the jump and has made a roaring success of it down in Statesboro. That's the direction I would go. I don't have any real sense of the lower levels in either men's or women's basketball. It is not the same as FCS, where I have a kind of an inkling with these things. I would have to do a lot more research to give you some real names on this front, but for this search, that is where I go, is that in this league, you've got Coach Hayden, you've got Julie Folks at Marshall, who is at Transylvania. You have Shonda Rigby, who has been there at Troy and built them to be one of the best consistent league teams in the league in women's basketball. Back in 2012, she was hired by Troy from Pensacola State and had won a lot of games there. I think that is the model to follow in this league. And so I've got that idea for the women, which is separate from the men, but just I think that's worth trying, especially when you look at it that Jean Hill was an assistant for NC State. Sharon Baldwin-Tenner had been at ECU, and she had also come from the Power Conference assistant ranks before that. And so kind of in the same light of you try something different that the other way didn't work before. This hasn't been the type of hire they haven't made that type of decision on this hire the last couple of cycles. And it for all of the reasons I've just listed, I just feel like it is the way that makes the most sense for me. But I also don't know. The same disclaimers apply as far as what you hear might not be anything, might not be the way the coach search is playing out. But that is where my attention is drawn on the women's side of who they bring in. And that's where I would lean if it was my hire to make, which of course it is not.
Somebody hire Brady to, be in Charlie's office. That's what we need.
So I feel like that sums up both of those searches. More to come. Obviously, if there is chatter we can pick up on, if we want to dive into some of these names more specifically at the top of next podcast, as we both dive into it a bit more, it is still a little bit fresh. We will do so at that point. We will also touch on college football, because Sunbelt released a schedule, which probably sticks, even though Louisiana Tech Conference USA stuff is still technically pending.
Yeah, I was about to say, it definitely isn't, because obviously Louisiana Tech is going to become the first 22-0 regular season team in college football history.
We also need to circle back to Ted Hurst, because he did the combine since the last couple pods, but it's kind of just been, there's other stuff that has been pressing, but should certainly circle back to that. And the Georgia State Pro Day was this past week as well, so recenter the NFL draft conversation, as Georgia State is about to have likely their best ever draft pick. Like, that is still something that is in the near horizon. So all of that to come, plus baseball's opening weekend in Sunbelt play. Non-emergency edition when we are back in front of these microphones next week. Thank you for checking in for this emergency episode of the Thursday Night Podcast, breaking down both of the movings on of the Georgia State men's and women's basketball coaches. We will catch you next time.